Okay, so your upcoming talk at DCW Spain in Madrid is the hidden cost of tomorrow's data centers. I guess good place to start. What are those hidden costs, and I suppose why are they hidden? Why are they not so obvious to many organisations?
Yeah, thank you. And look, thanks, Phil. Great to chat today, and thanks for the opportunity. So, look, I'm going to be talking about something a little bit different to the standard technical conference agenda. And that's because, I'm pretty passionate about the fact that we do sometimes overlook risks in the data center life cycle. So, hidden costs are not just about the costs that we think that we're accounting for on the balance sheet when we build up an investment case for a data center life cycle project. But, they're actually very complex and difficult to quantify. But when things go wrong in data centers, the risks that we don't see can be significant. And they range from reputational to, regulatory and compliance breaches with our customers and regulators, and also investor confidence and customer trust. Breaching SLAs, for example, doesn't do us very well with our customers. So those intangible costs are things that when you're working in the data center space, you really need to be cognizant of and think a lot more about the what if scenarios, because actually things do go wrong. And we've seen many examples across the years, including one significant one last week. So look, I think, the hidden costs of data centers and what I'm going to try and get across is just an understanding of what those actually are, the breadth of those, and to hopefully embed some understanding. And it's different for every organisation, clearly, but just touch on some key points. People don't often understand these. They don't factor them into their strategies, into their procurement, into their business cases, into their designs, into their partnerships until it's too late. And we're not just talking about financial and operational impacts. We're talking about, loss of, as I said, investor and customer confidence. Actually, it extends to people within your teams and your organisations too. If you're not actually building a resilient facility or portfolio, and you see repeated instances of risks manifesting along the track, then actually your talent starts to lose confidence as well. People want to work for organisations which take risks seriously and have robust processes, and that extends all the way down to them feeling valued in the process and sharing their knowledge as part of that risk management strategy. Yeah, and look, other risks are things like the geographies in which we operate, societal risks, natural hazards, all of those sort of larger macro issues which we really do need to consider. So it's very broad.
Yeah, and in terms of resilience, which I guess is an important aspect for the data center. I mean, is it a sort of one size fits all model, or does it vary, depending on circumstances for different data centers? And I guess just your thoughts as to how resilience, so should we say the traditional view of resilience, fits with risk management, or do people need to change their thoughts as to resilience when it comes to risk management? Yeah, just your thoughts.
No, thank you. Look, great question. So resilience isn't a one size fits all model, absolutely not. And I think, it's becoming more and more complex in terms of navigating the relationships between the different moving parts in the sector, and particularly when we have organisations that work across multiple geographies, have portfolios of data centres. They're not just geographically bound to one, to one region. So resilience in itself should be viewed as a playbook, and it must adapt to both the geography that you're operating in, the market, your customers, and also the people that you've got to work with. Excuse me. Can't be coming down with a cold before my talk next week. So look, it's very much contextual. So as we know, if you're looking at a geography, we have to think strategically through due diligence and site acquisition in terms of where we actually look for land, or we look to acquire data centres, we need to look at natural hazards, seismic, flooding, fire, extreme weather events, all of those things. And sometimes we can't avoid those, obviously, if you're in a Japan or a New Zealand or a California for seismic as an example, but we have to build resilient strategies behind that. The key thing is understanding the geographies that we're working in and the risks that go with those as well. Supplier risk is also something that I want to just touch on. For the critical supply chain is, can be particularly fragile. And so we really need to think about, as part of our resilience strategy, how we source our key equipment and build some robustness and diversity into the process as well. In terms of, not a one-size-all model as well, we need to actually think about the people that are working in our data centers and operating them. And I think at times we have this expectation that we can train everyone to a homogenous level. If we've got a multinational organisation, everyone will understand. Actually, that's not the case. And I do work in the training sector as well. So I see a lot of people coming through and wanting to get into the sector, which is wonderful because we have such a talent shortage. But actually the responsibility on the organisation is to make sure that, that there's an understanding around operational protocols, safety and design, because actually the number of incidents of downtime in data centres that can be pegged back to human error or misunderstanding of operational procedures is extremely high. And so when you're looking at your resilience strategies, training is something that should absolutely not be underestimated. So, so in terms of not being a one size all fit for resilience strategies, absolutely not. Tick box compliance as well won't keep the lights on, but a really sound strategy around resilience will, yeah. So
Okay, I
there's a
mean,
whole lot in there.
yeah, no, that's fantastic. I mean, I'm thinking also as well, sort of energy access. I mean,
Yeah,
sustainability is an ongoing sort of focus for the industry, and I guess one would say they are or they will become sort of boardroom levels sort of risk to look at. Just your thoughts in
totally.
terms of grid constraints, policy uncertainty, or renewable. Just thoughts as to how those may or may not be impacting sort of data center operations.
Yeah. I think every conference that you and I might attend of late really emphasizes the challenges around energy security, energy availability. And it is really, and we've seen Infrastructure Masons, case in point, his paper last year talking about, articulating the fact we're going to be seeing more and more energy hubs in regions, being able to provide secure power, readily available power, and customers coming, building campuses, etc. And this is it. We need reliable power. We know that some grids are heavily constrained now. We have different power qualities in different parts of the world. If you work in Asia, where I do a lot of work, as well as Europe, you have varying power quality issues, and so you have to design around that and build in risk mitigation strategies. But we're seeing more and more on-site, behind the meter energy storage solutions. We're seeing organisations, in this market, you can't wait 5 years for power. You have to be able to obviously comply with, upstream utility conditions, regulations, but we're seeing much more happening on site now in terms of on-site power generation solutions. So we're thinking a bit differently, and we can still build resiliency into our product offering, and we need to. But we just can't rely on not getting power. So we have to think innovatively. And the great thing is the industry is thinking really innovatively in the energy space. It's very exciting. I think like what you see, I've done some work in Germany recently, and I find that an interesting, with all the regulations coming in, you can't just now look for power and say, I want 200 megawatts as an example, and get your application in. They're wanting to see more and more certainty around, I guess, skin in the game. So they're wanting almost a concept level of design, to go on as part of the application. I think that's going to really weed out the speculative organisations that are out there looking to almost, there's some blocking of, trying to secure power to block competition. And so I think Germany's got quite a fair and equitable regulation coming through, which is, which is going to be good for Germany. And I think that's going to encourage those that are serious to get in there and secure power. And then the grid will work with those operators, etc., to come up with solutions which are win-win. You do need a really resilient power strategy, and I think things we don't think about is potentially the changing dynamic of our value proposition, who our end customers might be. Do we have options on scalability of our power contract? How secure is that? What are the options for our end customers? Where are the price point escalations? What are the options to expand if we need to? If we acquire land adjacent, do we have a consistent power strategy that allows us at a checkpoint in time to grow? So they're just a couple of examples of things we should think about. So it's all about agility with our power strategy, if we can, and working, in close collaboration, if you have that luxury in the geography that you're in, to collaborate with with the upstream energy company. Yeah. It requires lots of negotiation, I'd say, but energy security, energy capacity, agility, and scalability to meet what we know is a very dynamic market at the moment. And we really don't know what our end customers' needs might be in 2 years' time, let alone 5 years' time. Yeah. So it's challenging. I think it's a great conundrum to be in at the moment, because it is driving a lot more collaboration and discussion in industry and partnerships with energy companies, with utility companies, with developers, with operators.
Okay. And just picking up something you mentioned a little bit about the sort of talent side of things. I guess it'd be good to understand. I mean, the industry constantly says that the workforce is aging and they're all going to leave and not being replaced, but no one seems to be panicking just yet. But I mean, how much of an issue is it in terms of skills, personnel, training, workforce, and also retaining key personnel? I guess there's quite a lot there, but just your thoughts as to where we are and what the industry maybe needs to do if we're not all to find out in 5 years' time that we've got all these data centers and nobody to understand how they work, if you like.
Yeah, you did right. I'm smiling here because I'm thinking I'm one of those aging workforce
Well,
that's
me
been
too.
in the
Yeah.
industry for a while. But it's actually funny, we it's a big global world, but actually still now, like I've been in this industry for a long time, like 28 years in data centers, you still come across some of the same people, but you're dead right. There'll be a point in time where those people will not be there. And I think it's super important to be able to, if you're in that position of being able to give back, to be quite honest, and share your knowledge. And that's part of, reverse mentoring for people who have those skills and institutional knowledge, to be able to share that. That's one thing. That's a good, feel good thing, and giving back. But if you're actually, we're talking broader, I think one of the things we're seeing is we do have a continued shortage of talent, and it's just escalating because we simply, the gap rather is escalating because we simply cannot keep pace with what's happening now with AI, with the huge investment from governments, fueling additional development. We just don't have the people. So I think, while technology can scale in months, and we've seen that, we can't scale our talent and people pipelines in months. It takes years. And it's not just about going on a course, and there are some excellent, course providers out there doing a great job and trying to provide, a skills based knowledge to help, get people into the industry. You actually have to learn on the job. You have to be mentored. You have to learn through experience, and it takes time. So I think the key thing there is still this huge bottleneck, and it needs investment. So I guess, I've worked both consultant and developer operator side in data centers. And one of the things I think is important not to overlook is about retaining people as well. So you actually have to invest in ongoing training and not just assume someone comes in with a base level to do their job. Everyone, myself included, is continually learning, and it's key in this industry because it's absolutely so rapid. You need to invest in people. There needs to be a budget assigned for training. Often there is, but sometimes when things get tough financially, training is one of the first budgets to get cut. So look, investment in training, and testing that workforce readiness as well. So getting people into operations, seeing how they go, look, is as vital in my view as investing in capital or hardware. You just cannot forget your people, because if you haven't got your people, to design, to operate, you've really got nothing there. Robots can't do it all and won't do it all. And humans bring judgment and critical thinking. When the proverbial hits the fan and we do have outages, it requires that agility, that time in the trench actually learning. And this is where learning from others is super important as well. But I think, a continued focus, as we've got from lots of industry organisations, to promote education is brilliant. We just need more of that. And I think just maybe more acceptance from organisations that they're not going to get the perfect employee who may apply fully trained. There's an onus on the organisation to think about the great skills someone does have. And I think, honestly, everyone is trainable, in my view, so long as they are relatively smart and they have the right attitude. Anyone can be retrained into the data centre sector, is my view. We can all pivot.
Okay, and then perhaps moving on to governance, and I guess alongside the governance, we've got the sort of contracts. Both of those sort of things are evolving. Be good to understand the changes you think leaders should be making or looking at making in terms of, reflecting today's sort of real world risks. What's going on there?
Yeah, look, I think, as I said right at the start, we're working in a much more complex environment, regulatory, also linked to some of our, financing, investment structure upstream, in terms of the geographies in which we operate for compliance and things like that. So governance, just needs to be really robust. You need to have a really strong board. Obviously, it goes without saying. I sit on an energy board, actually, and I've sat on a number of boards like construction as well, and strong leadership at board level, a really diverse team. Having an understanding of the business is critical, obviously, but it shouldn't just be about box ticking. It's really important from governance level down to actually understand the business of data centres, get in the trenches. I find it quite amusing and sad at the same time that, a lot of HR recruiters recruiting for the sector have never been in a data centre, as an example. Or you have financiers in an organisation, the accountants trying to cut costs for data centres, and they don't understand because they've never been taken through their organisation's data centres. So I think it's amusing, as I said, but tragic in lots of ways, because, there needs to be this overall understanding. Contracts, I'm seeing, that they are evolving. I think as we're seeing more and more emphasis on ESG as well, and obviously end customers, corporate sustainability goals as well. We're seeing more requirements built into some of the leases, more upfront information required as part of that RFP process, which is really good. Supply chain transparency in terms of contracts with your supply chain, again, as we're looking at, and reporting is not consistent for ESG reporting across different countries or regions. In APAC, for example, there's no consistent ESG reporting framework at all, as an example, but it will come. And Europe's a little bit more mature. But we need to understand the supply chain. So when we are contracting with our supply chain, again, we're seeing more ESG related clauses in there for transparency around business continuity, around ESG, around scope 1, 2, and 3 type components as well. And in contracts, again, a little bit more depth coming in around SLAs, breaching of service level agreements for customers, particularly around outages and compensation, because we're seeing more and more events which are, it's always an event which pops up. Gosh, no one would have thought about that happening, like the AWS issue on the east coast of the US last week and how it impacted so many people around the world, and this reliance on on availability zones outside the country in which you're operating. More and more discussion around government's responsibility for sovereign data centres, So the governance portfolio is a lot more broad now, and it needs to be thinking globally, because often you may be operating locally, not realise the impact of some of the how you choose to disperse your workloads. It may sit somewhere else, and it might bite you in the bum. So it's not necessarily about changes leaders should make. It's more around being up to speed, understanding the market in which you operate, understanding the big trends, and actually understanding when you're down in the trenches how you can recover. So that very broad understanding and the nuances that go with the data center ecosphere.
Okay, it'd be good to maybe understand as well how operators can strike a balance with the sort of cost efficiency on one side and resilience on the other. So how can they sort of strike that balance without maybe falling into the trap of, I mean, gold plating, I guess is the expression. Just your thoughts as to how they can manage that.
Yeah. Look, as you know, Phil, it's a very, very competitive market. Not everyone, but a lot of organisations are competing for the same larger customers, unless you're, an enterprise type organisation with a more defined geographic targeted customer reach. You have to think about your customers, and you have to. Sometimes I think I might be a bit blunt here. There might be a bit of developer ego, a little bit of competition, wanting to be the biggest, boldest, look the greatest in terms of external architecture. The reality is, though, construction costs are obviously they're significant, but they are different in every part of the world, and we're seeing such focus. And there needs to be clearly in business cases to get the required, ROI for project business case funding. But we're seeing a lot more finesse around different solutions from industry, modular as an example, or prefab, offshore, off-site construction, things to really speed up the process. Okay, so I guess my point is we need to cut the cloth to suit our customers. Hopefully, we're really clear on who our customer demographic is. And we need to target for that. And now we're seeing, obviously, because we don't know where technology is going, more of a move to a hybrid solution on the cooling side. So we need to think a little bit more laterally. So we're building in some flexibility and agility. It does come at a cost. But I would just encourage everyone to think closely about who the customer is, knowing your customer, and then you're building for that. The customers know what they want. You only need to meet what the customer minimum requirements are, really, and meet the SLAs. What I'm saying is you shouldn't over-engineer, over-design. The more complex you make the mechanical and electrical infrastructure as well, the more points of failure you're introducing, the less reliable potentially in some parts of the system are when you do a reliability calculation. So over-complexing a design will cost you. It won't just cost you an initial capital outlay, it costs you in maintenance, etc., etc. So just being really careful about that. So design for your customer reality and your intended return on investment, and also within the parameters that you've got to work with. You've got financial streams of funding coming down. You've only got what you've got to work with. Or if you're going out for investor calls, do you really need X billion? Can you get away with a little bit more, a little bit less rather? So you really need to be mindful. Um, and that's pretty much it, because it is a competitive market. So every I won't say dollar per megawatt, but every $1 million per megawatt, as an example, to build, if you can drop a 1 or 2 million off, it makes a huge difference in this market. So that's all I can say, is just really know your customer, work with your supply chain, continuous improvement. How can you build faster, smarter, be mindful of the different products coming in and their costs, and you need to be adaptable to the market as well. And often, you're working in geographies where you've got tax incentives, you've got, where can you have zero import tax duty applied to large mechanical and electrical infrastructure, as an example, which is a huge proportion of your build cost, as opposed to sourcing somewhere where you have to pay import duty. It's all about being smart and not over-engineering, not overpaying on the supply chain, being really smart. And you need to move. So just because you've got a model that's worked for the last 2 years, 5 years, doesn't mean it's going to be ideal for the next 2 years, next 5 years. So you've always got to be thinking ahead.
Yeah, and I'm also interested in terms of how resilience impacts, shall we say, both sort of ends of the supply chain. So, I guess when it comes to sort of investor confidence, resilience has a role to play there, and clearly when it comes to end users, customers, resilience. So, just your thoughts, I suppose, as to how a resilience strategy impacts both the investor end of the, if you like, the start of the process, and then when it comes to the customers as well.
Mm. Yeah. So, investors want to back the right horse, obviously we all do if we're betting on a horse, but investors are no different. And so, they are looking at risk, through the lens of, who are the organizations we want to back? Are we comfortable with their approach, their management structure, their whole approach to procurement, their team? Often if you're doing an acquisition on an organization, which I get involved with from time to time, it's reviewing the whole governance structure, the management team, the operational team, the design, everything in between. And so they want full confidence when they look at, their own capital investment decisions. So also, this extends to understanding, if a developer's got a proven renewable energy or diversified energy strategy, like what is the robustness of the energy portfolio or the energy strategy backing a portfolio? Is it agile? What are the single points of failure? Is there any third-party reliance? Do we have first right of power for a future off-taker, or are we part of a larger? We're sitting on a campus in Johor in Malaysia, and we've got 5 different competitors operating off one primary substation in the area. Like, everyone competes. Do we have robust strategies in place if the proverbial hits the fan and we need fuel for generators? Do we actually have a prioritization from our suppliers, and do we have a minimum of 2? And now we know we actually need, probably more in some constrained areas. So investors are looking really deep, and they go into huge lengths through due diligence to make sure that these aspects are covered. Yeah, and I think you see the investors, and we've seen lots of investor activity recently. They don't make these decisions lightly at all. as I said, there's a huge amount of work that goes into it. Business resilience, business continuity policies are really important, embedding those procedures at governance level all the way down, and they are reviewed. So resilience doesn't just protect capital and brand value as well. From an investment perspective, it attracts capital actually, and it attracts the smart end customers, and that in turn, long-term leases, long-term return on investment. Everyone wins in that regard.
And in terms of maybe looking forwards a little bit, are there any particular risks you think that the industry is perhaps still underestimating and maybe will arrive sort of faster than expected? And I guess perhaps for part two of that, if it's all right, if we could describe the current situation as companies are sort of reacting rather than building proactive resilience, what happens if that sort of philosophy continues? So I suppose, what are people still underestimating, and if people still react rather than are proactive, where does that leave the industry, if that's makes sense?
Yeah, thank you, Phil. All right, there's a few there. Jumping out, for me is water stress in communities. We've done some good work on power, PUE, yes, it all ties down to reducing the total energy, obviously that we draw, that we offtake, and so we're seeing good advancements and innovations with behind the meter solutions, and we can do without the grid. So we're getting more sustainable there in terms of resiliency for energy. But water is a scarce resource in many areas. So water stress, I think in some areas you just can't rely on air-cooled solutions. You do need water. So I think, this the development of data centers isn't just going to be about facilities for AI. We still have, a large cloud sector of the market. We still have I think a rising edge market coming up over the next few years. And so water will still be required for solutions, for cooling solutions. So I think, it's just being mindful of water stress and how we deal with that in communities, and, how we plan for that. And perhaps it's, more on-site water treatment, desalination, all sorts of different options that we might be thinking about in the future a bit more. I mean, we are thinking about them now, but we might just have to see more innovation in water. Cyber risks, of course, are here with us, and I think we just cannot lose sight of how incredibly damaging to organisations and to service cyber does have. So those risks, I think, are they underestimated now? I think if you've been on a board and you've been hit by a cyber issue, you're a little bit more mindful and responsive and accepting of, oh my God, this is what really goes down, and this is how we may or may not deal with it in a good manner or a poor manner. But or do we pay a ransom or do we not pay a ransom, as an example? But I think in the world we're living in and operating in, with geopolitics, with war is now being carried out on through attacks on energy centers and things like that. Cyber is huge, and data centers are part of the ecosystem. Everything we do today is just supported by data centers, so that's not to be underestimated. And I think we're going to see more and more infiltration and data leaks and breaches and issues as a result of cyber. Workforce, we've talked about that. I don't think, I think we talk a lot about the skills gap. We know there's a problem. Are we underestimating the size of that gap? Probably. And all I can say is, as I've said before, is we just need to keep encouraging more people, more retraining, more organisations involved in that training and partnerships as well. And what was your second question, Phil? Sorry.
So yeah, no, it's just about the if you characterize the current approach as sort of being a fairly reactive approach when it comes
Mm,
to resilience. If people don't get more proactive, for some of the things you've maybe described there, what do you think happens to the you obviously
yeah.
referenced last week's sort of high profile thing. Do you think there'll be a sort of major meltdown that'll call into question, if you like, the whole sort of digital infrastructure if people don't start looking further ahead, or just your thoughts as to what happens if people continue to be reactive as opposed to proactive when it comes to resilience?
Yeah. Look, I don't think there'll be a global meltdown personally because, you know, not one data center, I'll say that is the same as another, but when you've been through a few, they all start to look the same as each other. But
Yeah,
the reality is they're not, they're all, every organization has a different approach to design and resilience, etc. A lot of them are similar. That's certainly fair to say. Um, so I think, being proactive is around thinking ahead, obviously, with through the lens of resilience. I think we need to really think about climate impact more. And so if you are an organization and you're looking at scaling a portfolio, it's just actually working, just looking at climate reporting, um, looking at extreme weather events. Fire is a terrible one. You know, terrible fires that you don't anticipate, but you need to start looking at trends as an example, flooding as well. And I know, we're seeing extreme weather events taking out all sorts of regions that we never thought would ever happen. But we need to actually think this could, and rather than saying it's unlikely in a when you're doing a risk matrix, it's unlikely to happen. You need to elevate it, I think, to say it's possible, or it's actually that could be probable, and that will then change your approach to design. It may change your approach to how you distribute some of your workloads from an architecture perspective to build in more robustness, as an example. Things like proactively looking at how you can renegotiate your renewable energy contracts if you've got them, or energy contracts per se. So in the future, what could you put in place now, thinking about changes in technology, um, different demands, different customer profiles? Is there more agility that you can get from your energy utility to build in, a bit more upside for you as opposed to them? So I think thinking about the whole energy strategy is a good example of how you can be more proactive as well. Um, I think really looking at strengthening the internal monitoring of your systems, and taking, if you've got multiple data centers, you're monitoring them now, but actually I think being always playing devil's advocate in terms of the what if scenarios, really testing with disaster recovery scenario planning. So many organizations just don't do it. Or if they do it, they scratch the surface. They don't want to do a full DR response to not just, one event, but think about if A happened and then B happened at the same time, and then you were calling C and C, your supplier wasn't available. What is the multiple impact? And it's when you really drill down that you start to think, shit, okay, excuse my language. Okay, we could have mitigated that by doing this. And so it's always thinking ahead. And some organizations, are better than others in that regard, but in terms of what I've seen of late, there's not enough emphasis on disaster recovery, disaster scenario planning and recovery. It's so super important. Um, it's no good having the best built, well-designed facility, if we've got dependencies which really impact us if we have an outage, we just cannot restore business to the point of, pre-outage. So thinking ahead is really important. And again, those SLAs as well with your customers. Um, there needs to be protection for you as well if you're operating a facility, and it can't always be in the customer's favour. Obviously, you don't want it to be. It should be a balance. But as we look at the impact, of climate change on outages, on reliance on, one availability zone for your workloads as an example. Um, just think broader around what can happen and how does this affect you in terms of your compensation to your customers. So having more risk balanced conversations as well. So risk should be shared between customer and provider of the service. It can't be too one-sided as well. So I'd encourage that conversation.
Yeah, and then maybe just sort of in finishing up in terms of your actual presentation at the conference, what is it that folks are going to sort of get from what you talk about that they maybe won't get elsewhere? And I suppose again, I'm fond of asking these sort of two-part questions. You obviously the hidden cost is the focus. I'm just intrigued how you came, or decided that's important. Was there a particular thing that brought it home to you that there are these hidden costs that folks aren't really aware of, or have you just gradually become aware that this is an area that needs addressing?
Yeah. I'm laughing. You're saying, what are they going to get? The first thing, Phil, I'd say is I hope they get my Kiwi accent, because that could be a problem otherwise. That would be the first thing. But no, in all jokes aside. So look, what I'd really hope that they'll pick up is just a few takeaways, of course. But look, stop treating risk as something to avoid. Risk is super important, super interesting. Start treating it as something to strategically manage and take it seriously if you're not already. Every project decision is a bet, strategically, but the goal should not be perfection. It's about balance, and that's about, setting the appropriate level of resilience in your organisation and managing that risk appropriately, and not over engineering, not over investing, etc. I think for leaders of organisations, resilience should be viewed as a value creator, not just an insurance policy. But it will, you want to win investor trust and attract and retain your customers too. And that's about actually offering a resilient product. And when we do have issues, and we always will have an issue, because when we least expect it, it was something that will happen. It's about how you respond to it as well. So those really robust procedures in place, communication as well with your customers. Leadership sets the tone around all of this. Don't treat resilience and the cost associated with it as just another, line item on the balance sheet. You do need to take it seriously. Tick box compliance won't keep the lights on, but having a strong resilience strategy will, in my view. All right, so there's those things. And then, what drew me to this topic? I've worked in the data center and business continuity sectors for a long time now. I've actually seen, a number of examples where projects have failed for a number of reasons. And some of them were human because, as an example, service people weren't appropriately trained. So when there was an outage, the wrong switches were pretty much pulled on an electrical switchboard, dropped the customer, huge, obviously downstream issues, huge penalties. And, that could have been absolutely avoided had the organisation actually invested more in its staff and bothered to train them and have a good induction policy procedure when, bring people into the organisation, train them up, put them up with buddies, etc. I've also seen instances of cost cutting where, a design was there, it was robust, it provided resilience to meet a customer's end requirements. Budgets got constrained, some shortcuts were taken, issues resulted from an outage, and of course, the SLA was breached. And again, that was around education, people making a decision in favour of the financial side, as opposed to understanding the customer impact. And it wasn't just an outage, it was brand damage, etc. And then your own staff start to lose trust and confidence as well. And patience, investors lose patience as well, if you've got multiple issues happening in a data centre. So look, there's a few things in there, I've had a few experiences over the years, and I just found topic really interesting, and I've loved it ever since. So for me, it's always looking for the gaps, thinking, okay, what could we do better? What hasn't been considered now? And how do we, manage that and mitigate, obviously at the least cost, but for the best outcome, clearly, because we need to balance that. So I enjoy it, and I enjoy working with organisations to help them navigate that from board level all the way down to tactical. Yeah.
It's been brilliant to chat, and thank you so much for sharing so many brilliant insights into what's going on in the data center industry when it comes to risk and resilience. And obviously, looking forward to your presentation at the event. But for now, at least,
Thank
Donna,
you.
thank you so much for the time. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Phil. I've not been to Madrid for a long time, so I can't wait as well. And I'm sure it's going to be a fabulous event. Appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thanks again.